On the night of my 18th birthday, everyone at the dinner table kept smiling at me like it was the happiest day of my life. My parents raised a toast. My younger sister hugged me. My uncle joked that adulthood had finally arrived. None of them noticed that, during dessert, I quietly signed one digital document on my phone. In less than 2 minutes, every dollar of the inheritance my late grandmother had left me was transferred into a private trust that nobody in my family could ever touch. The next morning, they found out, and suddenly, every smile in that house disappeared. My name is Charlotte Hayes. I'm 18 years old, and until my 18th birthday, I believed the hardest part of growing up would be choosing a college or figuring out what kind of career I wanted. I had no idea adulthood would begin with discovering that the people who raised me were far more interested in my future bank account than my future happiness. From the outside, my family looked comfortable. We lived in a beautiful home outside Seattle. My father owned a construction company, and my mother managed a local charity. My younger sister, Emily, was 16, funny, confident, and somehow always the center of attention. To everyone else, we looked like the kind of family people admired. Inside the house, though, things felt different. Over the last 2 years, every conversation somehow found its way back to my grandmother's estate. If your grandmother leaves you anything, we should invest it wisely, my father would casually mention over dinner. My mother always smiled before adding, families should build wealth together. At first, I didn't think much of those comments. They sounded responsible. But the closer I got to turning 18, the more specific they became. Dad talked about expanding his business. Mom mentioned renovating the house. Emily laughed about finally getting the luxury car she'd always wanted. Nobody ever asked what I wanted. The only person who had ever asked that question was my grandmother, Eleanor Hayes. She wasn't simply wealthy. She was thoughtful. Every birthday, instead of buying extravagant presents, she gave me books, handwritten letters, and hours of conversation about independence, integrity, and making decisions I could live with. Money is loud, Charlotte, she'd often tell me. Character whispers. Learn to hear the quieter voice. When she passed away 18 months earlier, losing her felt like losing the safest place I'd ever known. Her attorney later informed me she had left me a significant inheritance, but I wouldn't gain legal control of it until my 18th birthday. That birthday dinner was only 3 days away. Everyone in my family seemed unusually excited. For reasons I couldn't yet explain, I wasn't. 18 months before my birthday, I spent almost every Saturday afternoon at my grandmother Eleanor's house. Her health had been declining for years, but she never let illness define the time we shared. We baked together, worked on crossword puzzles, and talked about everything from college dreams to the books we both loved. One rainy afternoon, she surprised me by asking everyone else to leave the room. When the door closed, she reached for my hand. "Charlotte," she said softly, "there's something important I need you to remember long after I'm gone." I tried to smile, pretending we weren't having the kind of conversation that terrified me. She looked directly into my eyes. Money changes people. Sometimes it doesn't create greed, it simply reveals it. I didn't know how to respond. She continued, "I've watched our family for a long time. They love each other, but when money enters the room, people begin making excuses for things they'd never normally do." I wanted to tell her she was worrying too much. Instead, I listened. "I've made arrangements with my attorney, Daniel Brooks," she said. "When you turn 18, don't make any decisions because someone pressures you. Not even if that someone is family." I promised I would remember. She squeezed my hand one last time before smiling. "Good. Because love never demands immediate access to your future." After Grandma passed away, Mr. Brooks called me into his office. He explained that my inheritance would remain protected until my 18th birthday and that my grandmother had left detailed legal instructions for me alone. Over the following months, we met several times. He never told my parents about those meetings because Grandma had specifically requested complete confidentiality. Instead, he patiently taught me about financial responsibility, asset protection, and something called an irrevocable private trust. The more I learned, the more Grandma's warning echoed in my mind. On the morning of my 18th birthday, while balloons filled our dining room and relatives began arriving with gifts, a confidential email appeared in my inbox. The subject line contained only 5 words. "It's time to decide, Charlotte." The evening of my 18th birthday arrived with more excitement than I had expected. Our dining room looked beautiful. Fresh flowers covered the table. My mother had hired a caterer, something she had never done for any of my previous birthdays. Relatives filled the house, laughing over music while waiters carried trays of appetizers through the living room. Everyone kept telling me how proud they were. Yet somehow, every compliment felt strangely connected to tomorrow instead of today. My father stood to make a toast just before dinner. "Here's to Charlotte," he said, raising his glass. "A smart young woman who's officially becoming an adult." Everyone applauded. Then he smiled at me. "And now she'll have every opportunity to build an incredible future." The words sounded generous, but something about the way he emphasized build made me uneasy. As dinner continued, the conversation drifted exactly where I feared it would. Dad casually mentioned how his construction company could finally expand into commercial projects with the right financial backing. Mom laughed and said renovating the house would increase its value for the entire family. Emily grinned. "I've already picked out my dream car," she joked. "Charlotte loves me enough to help her favorite sister." Everyone laughed around the table. I forced a smile. Not one person asked whether I had plans of my own. Not one person wondered what Grandma had wanted for me. It felt as though the inheritance had already been divided in everyone's imagination before I had legally received a single dollar. Halfway through dessert, my phone vibrated quietly inside my pocket. The email from Mr. Brooks was still waiting. I looked around the table. Everyone was busy talking over one another, debating vacation destinations and investment ideas as if my future had already become a family project. "I'll be right back," I said, excusing myself. I stepped into the quiet hallway outside the dining room and opened the email. After reading every page one final time, I signed the trust documents electronically. The confirmation appeared almost instantly. "Transfer complete." I slipped my phone back into my pocket, took one deep breath, and returned to the table carrying the same calm smile. No one noticed. By the time coffee was served, everything had changed. Only I knew it. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. Not because I was nervous, because I already knew exactly how the day would unfold. Downstairs, my parents were unusually cheerful. My father had already made coffee, and my mother was arranging pastries on the kitchen island. She smiled the moment she saw me. "Happy first morning as an adult," she said.
Dad checked his watch.
"Our appointment with the financial advisor is at 10. Mr. Brooks should be meeting us there." The way he said us caught my attention. Nobody had asked whether I wanted a meeting. Nobody had asked if I had already made plans. To them, my inheritance had quietly become a family asset overnight. I simply nodded. "I'll come." An hour later, we walked into Daniel Brooks' downtown office. He greeted everyone politely before inviting us into the conference room. Dad wasted no time. "We'd like to discuss transferring Charlotte's inheritance into several investment accounts," he said confidently. "I've already prepared a few ideas." Mr. Brooks folded his hands calmly. "I'm afraid that won't be possible." The room went silent. Dad frowned. "What do you mean?" Mr. Brooks opened a folder. "Last night, shortly after 8:43, Charlotte exercised the legal authority granted to her under Eleanor Hayes' estate plan." My mother's smile disappeared.
He continued.
"Every asset in the inheritance has been transferred into an irrevocable private trust according to Mrs. Hayes' written instructions." Emily looked confused. "So, she owns it?" "Yes," Mr. Brooks replied. "But no individual, including Charlotte herself, can simply withdraw or distribute the principal outside the trust's governing terms." Dad leaned forward. "Surely she can change it."
"No."
"It is legally irrevocable." The words seemed to echo through the room. Mom turned toward me. "You did this." "I did. Without talking to us." I followed Grandma's wishes. Silence settled over the table. Emily crossed her arms. "So that's it? You don't trust your own family?" I looked at my sister, not with anger, but with disappointment. "This wasn't about trust," I answered quietly. It was about protecting something Grandma spent her entire life building. Dad's expression hardened. He stared at me for several long seconds before asking the one question that revealed what truly bothered him.
His voice was calm.
Almost too calm. Who told you to do this? My father's question lingered in the room long after he asked it. Who told you to do this? I looked directly at him. No one told me, I replied. Someone prepared me. Mr. Brooks quietly reached into his briefcase and placed a sealed envelope on the conference table. Eleanor instructed me to give Charlotte this only after the trust was established. My hands trembled as I recognized my grandmother's familiar handwriting. I carefully opened the envelope and unfolded several pages. The first line alone brought tears to my eyes. If you're reading this, my sweet Charlotte, then you listened instead of allowing yourself to be pressured. I'm proud of you. I swallowed hard and continued reading. Grandma explained that years before her health declined, my parents had repeatedly asked her for financial help. She had gladly assisted them at first, believing temporary setbacks happen to everyone. But over time, the requests became expectations. Loans were never repaid. Promises quietly disappeared. Whenever she refused another request, conversations suddenly became shorter, visits became less frequent, and holidays were filled with uncomfortable silence. She wrote that the money itself had never disappointed her. What hurt was realizing that generosity had slowly been replaced by entitlement. Near the middle of the letter, another paragraph stood out. I am not protecting my money for my family, Charlotte. I am protecting you from what money sometimes does to good judgment. Never confuse pressure with love. The people who truly care about you will still be standing beside you, even when they cannot benefit from your success. I lowered the letter for a moment. The conference room was completely silent. Mr. Brooks opened another folder. Your grandmother also asked me to preserve copies of certain financial records. He slid several documents across the table. They showed years of personal loans, unpaid balances, written repayment agreements, and notes documenting conversations between my grandmother and my parents. Nothing illegal. Nothing dramatic. Just a long pattern of borrowing without taking responsibility. Grandma had never spoken bitterly about any of it. She had simply paid attention. Suddenly, her warnings made perfect sense. She hadn't expected my family to steal from me. She feared something quieter. That they would slowly convince me sacrificing my own future was simply what a loving daughter should do. As I folded the letter, I realized my grandmother's greatest gift had never been the inheritance. It had been the wisdom to protect it, and myself, long before anyone realized protection would be necessary. The meeting ended without anyone saying much. My parents left the office ahead of me, speaking in low voices I couldn't quite hear. Emily followed them, glancing back only once before disappearing through the elevator doors. I stayed behind to thank Mr. Brooks. As we walked toward the lobby, he smiled gently. Your grandmother wasn't trying to divide your family, he said. She was trying to give you the freedom to make your own decisions. I nodded. For the first time since she passed away, I understood exactly what she meant. The weeks that followed were awkward. My parents called often, asking if we could start fresh. They insisted they had only wanted to help me make smart financial choices. Maybe part of that was true. But I couldn't ignore how differently they had treated me before the trust existed. Without money to discuss, our conversations suddenly became very short. That told me more than any argument ever could. One Sunday afternoon, my father asked if we could meet for coffee. I agreed. He looked tired when he arrived, older than I remembered from only a month earlier. After several minutes of uncomfortable silence, he finally spoke. I've been thinking about your grandmother's letter. I waited. He sighed. I don't know if I realized how often we talked about your inheritance instead of your future. It wasn't a perfect apology. He never tried to rewrite the past or pretend everything had been a misunderstanding. For the first time, he simply admitted that somewhere along the way, money had become louder than family. I can't change what happened, he said quietly. No, I replied, but you can decide what happens next. We finished our coffee talking about ordinary things. College, my design classes, books Grandma used to recommend. For once, no one mentioned investments, trust documents, or account balances. A few months later, I moved into my college apartment and began studying business and visual design, subjects I'd chosen because they genuinely excited me. The trust remained exactly where Grandma intended, protected, growing quietly in the background. I never touched the principal. Instead, I worked part-time, earned scholarships, and built the beginning of my own career. Because I finally understood something Grandma had tried to teach me all along. Financial security can create opportunities, but self-respect is what allows you to use them wisely. Today, whenever someone asks about the greatest gift I received on my 18th birthday, they usually expect me to mention the inheritance. I never do. The greatest gift my grandmother left me wasn't measured in dollars. It was the courage to protect my future without feeling guilty, the wisdom to recognize the difference between love and obligation, and the confidence to choose peace over pressure. Money can build a comfortable life, but character builds a meaningful one. Looking back, I didn't become wealthy on my 18th birthday. I became free. And that has always been worth far more than any inheritance.